In this lesson, we'll use the copy node to isolate how the velocity of our ocean is affecting the boat. So, picking up right where we left off, we have our boat and it is connected to this DOP import node. Now the DOP import node is what's controlling the position and rotation of the boat and its points. Now as we saw before, the individual points are what's being affected. What we need to do is have a single individual point that is actually being affected, and then we can attach the boat to that point. So instead of all of the sides of the boat moving around, just the whole entirety of the boat geometry will be moving as one unit. We can do that by using an add node. So right here inside the viewport in the network area, I'm going to use an add node. And sure enough, you can get to the add node just by hitting tab and typing add. You can also get to the add node by going to right-click in any empty spot, hit tab or backspace, use the tool menu, come down to polygon, and the first one on the list is add. So either way, however you get there, you just want to make sure you have an add node. And on this add node, what we need to do is add a single point. So yes, we want one point, and we need to click this little checkbox right here in order to turn that point on. Now before we do, I'm going to turn off our boat. So let's just disconnect that wire, and we'll hook up the add node. And now I'm going to turn on our single point. And there it is. It shows up in the viewport. We have a single individual point that is now attached to the position and rotation data that we're pulling from the DOP simulation and the fluid, which is done here in this DOP import node. So if we just play our timeline now, we can see that our point is moving. It's being advected or pushed along by the velocity that's inside of the fluid simulation. So now what we need to do is to get the boat attached to that point. And to do that, we're going to use a copy node. Now you can find the copy node going to the tool menu. Oops, I clicked on that little arrow right there, and what that'll do is collapse up that part of the user interface. So I'm just going to click it again to bring it back down. So we'll right click, we'll go to our tool menu, and under utility you'll find a copy node. Now it's right at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see that for some reason, it's right beneath convert volume, and it's in the utility menu. So we'll lay down our copy node, and we have these two inputs. And remember, if we need to find out what an input is for, we can simply hover over it till it gets that little glowy dot, and then middle click, and it will tell us what it is. So this one says it's what it wants to copy. Let's middle click on this one, and it says that it's the template that we want to copy it to. Well, we want to copy the boat here over to the animated point from the DOPS network, which is here. So we'll connect this one, we'll connect this one, we'll turn on the copy node, so make sure that the render flag is down here on the copy node. We rewind our timeline and we hit play. So now we can see that the entirety of the boat, not the boat's individual points, turn that back off here, but the actual entirety of the boat is being pushed along or advected by the motion that was generated inside of the DOP simulation with the flip fluid. So let's jump back out now so we can see all of the things in our scene. And just so we get a little bit better idea of the approximation of the surface, let's dive inside the AutoDOP network. And remember, we looked at how we can view the guides. So in the guides, let's turn off the particles and we'll turn on the surface. Now remember, the very first frame has not been calculated, so we don't know exactly where the surface is. However, with one single frame being calculated, we can now jump back and see our surface. So there's the surface. And let's click play and watch and just make sure we've got a turbulent enough movement. Okay, that's excellent. And we'll come back out now and view our boat. Now I'm going to turn on the AutoDOP network here. Usually you do not want the render flag or the visibility flag of the AutoDOP network on, especially at render time. But while we're working to develop this look, it's going to be handy enough to see that surface. So let's play forward now, knowing that on the first frame we still haven't calculated the surface. But here comes our surface. Oh, and it looks like our boat's getting sunk. In fact, the turbulence is so height right now that we're actually pulling the boat underneath the surface of the water. I don't mind the front of the boat dipping down underneath the surface, but I don't really want it to be completely submerged. Well, there's a way that we can fix that. Let's jump back into the boat node, and we're going to add a transform. And the transform node is going to go right here beneath the boat just prior to it being copied onto the point. And what that will allow us to do is simply push the boat up a little bit above the fluid surface. So we can go ahead and add that transform node. We'll just right click here in an empty space in the tool menu. And I believe it is in manipulate, transform right here. Now again, remember, if you don't remember the exact menu of where it's located, you can just type tab and start to spell out transform, and the list will filter down until you find the transform. So we'll slip that transform in right here underneath the file, make sure that it snaps into place. And I'm going to switch my view back to where I can actually ghost the other objects in the scene. Now, I know I need to calculate at least one frame before I can see the surface so I can know where my boat is in relationship to it. So we'll calculate that first frame. And I'm just going to view this from the side or the front, either one. You can use spacebar and the number 3, or spacebar and the number 4, or use the pull down menu here to go set view and then choose any one of the sides, the front, the right, just so you can see the level of the water in relationship to the boat. Now we're starting off almost halfway sunk as it is. By adding this transform node, we can apply basically a move to the boat prior to it being advected by the particle motion here from the DOP import. So let's just grab this translate, and I'm going to add a 0.125. Now you can see that just pops my boat up out of the water just a little bit. I don't know if that's going to be quite enough. Let me try a 0.25. That looks a little bit better. Now we can play back our simulation, and what we've done here is, because we have the transform highlighted, we're getting this sort of ghosted copy of it. I'm going to go ahead and just select the copy node. We'll play forward. The boat's doing okay, and now it gets sunk down almost below, but no, it stays afloat. It stays afloat. Oh, and it does get submerged there at the very, very end. So we can go ahead and just add a tiny bit more onto our transform. I'm going to try a 0.3. Oh, let's go with a 0.33. That should be just about perfect. We'll jump back out here to object level. I'm going to reset back to my perspective view. Come back out, hit play. Now I can see that my boat is being pushed around in position by the fluid. However, it's not doing any of that rocking and pitch and yaw. There's no rotation information being used on the boat. So it looks a little static. How do we add in that rotation information? Well, that rotation information comes from having any kind of direction on this point. Right now this point doesn't know which way is up or down or right or left. All it knows is that it's simply a point. Now I'm going to switch this back to where we hide the other objects, so we're just looking at our single point. Now, one way of having a point know which direction it is facing is to use a normal. And this little icon beneath the points here, if you turn that on, it will display the normal that's on the point. However, nothing changed in my viewport. That means I don't have a normal. My point has no sense of direction. So how do I add that information? Well, it's simple enough. You just come over here to your point, and we're going to use an attribute create. Okay, so we just come down to attribute on the tools menu and use create. I can set that right here in line with my point prior to the DOP information. And I want to add one attribute, and the name of that attribute is actually just going to be capital N. Oh. And capital N will add a normal onto that particular attribute, or onto that point. Add the normal attribute onto that particular point. Now a normal has to be 3 x, y, and z, so it has 3 values, x, y, and z, so we'll go ahead and change that to a size 3. And we want the value, the default value, to basically be straight up. So I'm going to guess that if I add 1 in y, I'll get a normal. And I'm going to go ahead and write a value as well as set the default, so both of these are set to 1. I'll move my render flag down here now to the DOP import, and you can see that I had a change in my viewport. We really need to zoom in on that point here so we can see it. But now the point has this little sort of spike coming off of it. Now, prior to adding the normal, it's not visible in the viewport. But by simply adding this n as an attribute to the point, we've added a normal. And this allows it to have a sense of direction. Now, when we call in the DOP import information, we back up, we'll watch the point and how it moves. So you can see now that not only does the point move in the X, Y, and Z direction, but it also rotates. So right now it's rotated over to the side quite a bit. Well, that information gets passed on up to our boat. Now I'm going to turn the point normals off. And we notice something about our boat. Our boat is actually pointing straight up now instead of straight forward. Well, basically what that means is that we've set our normal to point straight up. However, what DOPS is looking for is for that normal to be pointing straight forward on the boat. So let's just change the direction of our normal. And instead of pointing it straight up in Y, let's point it straight down the Z axis. And I'd get that just by looking here at the information that I get from my little location icon here. And it tells me that Z is positive, running in the direction that's left in the viewport. So that's how I want my boat to face. Well, I can control that here by changing this from straight up in Y. I don't want those values here. We'll change those to 0. And we actually want them pointing straight forward in Z. So I can just add a variable of 1 there, or a value of 1 there in both the default value, and we want to write a value to that attribute. And it all shows up here. Now we'll rewind and click play. And now we can see that our boat is not only moving in X, Y, and Z, but it also has a rotation to it. In fact, you can see it sort of turning on its Y axis. And now it's beginning to be sucked down in the front. Oh, it is going to be too turbulent enough to pull our boat down under the surface of the water, I guess. Let's jump back up and see here. So we'll let that surface calculate on the first frame. And notice that our turbulence is going to be enough to pull that boat down. And it looks like we are going to sink it. Now, if we didn't want to do that, we could always go back and change the turbulence that's on our ocean. And we can always adjust again with that transform node. Here, if we needed to animate any extra keyframes on that translation to counteract the intensity of the velocity, we could easily control that right here by setting counter keyframes with the transform node. So that's it. That's how we float a boat on a turbulent ocean inside of Houdini. Next, we take a look at the Sculpted Fluids Shelf tool.